Chapter 16. Doing a Favor. Bess and George were eager to help Nancy, so they promptly agreed to try their luck at sleuthing. Their chum proposed they visit the third-class quarters, strike up an acquaintance with the red-haired man, and by adroit questioning learn if he had ever been in River Heights. Unfortunately, the two girls lacked their chum's cleverness. After absenting themselves nearly 3 hours, they returned to report they had involved themselves in several humorous situations, but had acquired very little information. "Didn't you learn anything at all about the red-haired man?" Nancy asked, trying not to show her disappointment. "The red-haired man!" exclaimed George. "There are at least 3 of them. But the poet in room 572 is by far the nicest," Bess added gaily. "He seems in need of $50 too, but I couldn't imagine him being a crook." "I'm not giving money away just for the fun of it," announced Nancy. "Is he or is he not the right man?" "We couldn't find out without divulging everything," Bess replied regretfully. "He didn't seem inclined to talk about himself." "Then I may have to keep the money. I surely don't want to give it to the wrong person." "You'll never guess whom we saw while we were wandering about in third class," George remarked after a moment. "Doris Trenton." "What was she doing there?" Nancy inquired. "She said she was looking for a former nurse who had taken care of her years ago. Both Bess and I noticed that she acted as if she felt guilty about something." "Do you suppose she could be trying to avoid Henry Washburn?" Nancy asked reflectively. "That's what Bess and I thought." "There's really no need for Miss Trenton to remain in hiding," said Nancy, smiling. "I doubt very much that Henry would bother her now." "He's developing a great interest in Treldy, isn't he?" commented Bess. "Yes, the affair is becoming more serious every hour. They swim together, dance together, and play deck games. I am wondering how it will all end." Time passed very swiftly aboard ship. The 3 girls, never having crossed the equator, received the usual initiation. With other passengers, they submitted to duckings and fun-making. One day, Bess admitted to Nancy she had sampled many unusual delicacies between meals after the boat had stopped at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It was not long after this call that the girl had a severe case of seasickness. "I guess I was too eager to taste everything," she groaned to George, who tried to make her cousin more comfortable as she twisted in her bed. "I feel sort of funny inside myself," sympathized her boyish chum. "It's remarkable how Nancy can keep going so strong. She never loses a minute as long as there's a mystery." "It certainly is true. The trunk episode, Doris Trenton's love affairs, the red-haired stranger, and the unhappy Mrs. Jocelyn and her daughter. All keep Nancy up and doing." "Where is she now?" asked Bess, holding her head between her hands, for the patrician was beginning to pitch violently in the rough sea. A storm was descending with increased force. "Perhaps I should look for her," answered the other girl from River Heights. "I believe she is up in the wireless room learning the system." Without announcing herself, Nancy burst into the room. "Oh, girls!" she cried. "We've received an SOS. Our boat is going to the rescue of a lumber freighter. It's so exciting! Please come on deck. The storm is beautiful." "Why, Nancy," groaned Bess, "you're insane to be out in this weather. You might get washed overboard." "Let the seamen do the outdoor work," she concluded, snuggling into a soft pillow. "Dear me, you are a bunch of sissies. Come on You never will see a scene like this again, the Drew girl insisted. Well, I'll go up to the lounge, agreed George, but I'll not guarantee sticking out on deck with you. Nancy grabbed George's hand and pulled her out of the stateroom. Up the stairs the girls raced. Most of the passengers were unaware of the call for assistance from the lumber steamer, the Rex. The wind whipped about the girls as they attempted to get on deck. More rain clouds were gathering. "To the port side!" shouted an officer to the seamen. "Make ready the ropes!" All was hustle and bustle. Nancy hurried along, narrowly escaping tripping over a rope. George was not so fortunate, for down she tumbled as the sea spray swept over her. Frightened beyond belief, as she slid along the rain-covered deck toward the rail, George screamed that she was being washed overboard. Nancy grasped her chum, untangled the line from her sports shoe, and helped her to a cabin door. Instantly, the Fane girl disappeared inside, leaving Nancy to watch the rescue alone. "Heave to!" shouted the men. Lifeboats were swung from their davits. Oars were snapped into position. The 3 dories, well manned, skimmed through the tremendous seas. Nancy, intent on the scene, failed to see a girl huddled in a sheltered corner, completely swathed in a raincoat and hat. Now, however, her gaze turned toward her. In her hand she held a cablegram, which the wind suddenly blew from her fingers. Quickly, Nancy made a move to retrieve it. The young woman cried out in alarm as the paper floated further from her, but the Drew girl caught the sheet as it lodged in the wire railing. Glancing up in the pouring rain, Nancy beheld Nestrelda Darlington with outstretched hands, ready to take the message. Offering profuse thanks, the girl seized the cablegram and hastily retreated to the lounge, saying the weather was growing too frightful for her. She made no mention of what the message had contained. Nancy wondered if it could be from Mrs. Jocelyn, with instructions for her daughter's stay in Buenos Aires. Suddenly, the sinking Rex hove in sight. It was evident she was doomed for the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Strange shivers raced over Nancy as she saw the boat gradually submerging. She was glad the patrician had weathered the gale so well. In a short while, the crew was transferred to the large ship. Nancy noticed how haggard and worn the sailors appeared to be. Many of them grunted in Spanish, German, and English, their dislike for the fate which had overtaken them. They hated to see their beloved lumber boat vanish to the depths. "I know you'll miss her," said Nancy sympathetically to the stalwart captain, who still tried to hold his head high. "She was my old companion and friend. Nigh on to 30 years we sailed together," he answered the girl. "I'll sure miss the Rex." There were tears in his eyes. The evening before the patrician was to reach port, Nancy and her chums assisted in an entertainment given by the passengers for the benefit of the seamen of the lost Rex. With the ship's orchestra providing a background of music, they executed an intricate tap dance which was well received. Generous applause likewise was bestowed upon Miss Brownlee when she had her trained police dog perform various tricks. As an encore, the blind woman played several selections on the piano and gave a reading. Suddenly there rang out a cry, "Fire! Fire!" Startled, the audience became hushed, then en masse rose from their seats. At that moment, the performer's voice called, "Stay where you are! It's a false alarm!" The sightless girl started to sing, and all might have gone well had not a woman on deck begun to shriek. Knowing that the blind Miss Brownlee could not assist further as the audience began to leave, Nancy cried out loudly, "It's all part of the show! Please sit down!" Then she rushed toward the door and grasped the woman who was still shouting that the ship was on fire. "Please stop," pleaded Nancy. "Everything is all right. There's no fire. The performer is a ventriloquist, and her announcement was part of the entertainment." In a few seconds, the passenger was calmed and became sorry that she had caused such a scene without being sure of what she was doing. As she left the deck, Nancy returned to the salon, where she was greeted by bobbing heads and silent hand claps which said, "Thanks to you, quick-witted girl." Due to the late entertainment, Nancy and her chums overslept the next morning. On the other hand, Nestrelda Darlington had spent a sleepless night. She was plainly worried. The crumpled cablegram from her stepfather attested to her upset mental condition. She longed to discuss her family troubles with someone, but felt too timid to do so. "I wonder if I could ask Nancy Drew to help me," she thought at last. "I feel so alone. Senora Zola would never understand how I long for freedom. Maybe Nancy would. I'll try," she concluded as she gathered together her various personal belongings prior to landing. By the time all the girls had finished breakfast, the patrician was within sight of land. As Nancy stood by the railing, Nestrelda came over to talk with her. "We'll be in soon now, won't we?" "About 20 minutes, so the captain just told me," Nancy replied. "I don't know what to do," the other said nervously. "What do you think I should do, Nancy?" "I don't like to give advice, Treldy. Have you friends in Buenos Aires who could help you?" "No one with whom I could stay. I guess I may as well go on with the Laurel Hall girls as I planned." "Why don't you? That would seem wise to me." "My stepfather will be sure to inquire where my trunk has been sent." "I see," nodded Nancy sympathetically. "And you don't wish to change your plans just to please your stepfather?" Treldy's eyes flashed defiantly. "No, I don't. It was unreasonable of Mother to change her mind about this trip at the last minute. I'm sure it was Mr. Jocelyn's doings. Oh, Nancy, won't you help me?" "I don't see what I can do. It's very simple." The girl spoke so eagerly that Nancy knew she had thought up the plan long before. "You could have my trunk sent to wherever you are going. I'll give you my address. Later, you could have the trunk forwarded to me." The Drew girl hesitated, but only for a moment. She felt very sorry for Treldy in her predicament. "Yes, give me the address. I'll do that." "Oh, thank you," the other murmured gratefully. "I'll do you a big favor someday." Within half an hour, the passengers were ready to leave. There was a flurry of excitement as goodbyes were said, and stewards hurried back and forth with luggage. When the dock was sighted, Nancy hung over the railing to find Mrs. Purdy. For several minutes she could not locate her. Then, from out of a crowd of men and women who were waving and calling in Spanish to their friends on the boat, there appeared the little lady. "Mrs. Purdy!" cried Nancy, finally attracting the woman's attention. Other conversation was impossible for the moment. At last, Nancy and her chums crossed the gangplank and lined up for the customs. Their passports were inspected briefly and returned. Trunks had seals pasted on them after having been examined. "There, we're through at last," exclaimed Bess in relief. "Now to see South America." "It's going to be hard to get around when we can't understand the language," said George. "That's true," agreed Bess. But I've heard all the hotels and big shops have English-speaking people in them. Come on, urged George. We mustn't keep Mrs. Purdy waiting. Just a moment, said Nancy. Miss Brownlee seems to be having trouble. The girls saw that a long line of persons was being held up as the blind woman talked earnestly with several officials. The three chums moved closer so that they might hear what was being said, and were dismayed to learn that Miss Brownlee's right to enter South America was being questioned. But I'll not become a burden to anyone, the young woman was arguing. I may be blind, but I am in no way helpless. My wonderful dog is very well trained, and I have always earned my own living, and a very good one, too. Miss Brownlee is a talented musician, interposed Nancy, who wished to help. On board ship, she was our most popular entertainer. When Bess and George supported their chum, the officials held a quiet consultation. After some debate, they stamped the blind woman's passport and permitted her to leave. You girls helped me out of a most difficult situation, the blind woman said gratefully. If you hadn't spoken in my behalf, I know I should have been sent back to America. Nancy and her chums assisted Miss Brownlee to a taxi and expressed the hope they would meet her again. Then with Mrs. Purdy they drove off in another direction. The woman was delighted to see Snowball again and hugged and petted the beautiful cat. I am so glad to have you here, she said over and over again. One by one, the girls exclaimed over the sights and the beautiful city, their companion all the while explaining first in English, then in a mixture of English and Spanish, what various places were. We better stop at a bank and change some of our United States money into native coins, suggested Nancy. We'll need it. After this was done, the group drove to a charming home on the outskirts of the city. The girls were intrigued by the low, square, pinkish-colored building, in the center of which was an outdoor patio with a glimmering pool and vari-colored flowers. I'm going to love it here, Nancy exclaimed. This was our family home, said Mrs. Purdy. It has been closed for some time, but I think you will find it comfortable. It is like a dream place, said George, not given usually to sentimental remarks. Manuela, called Mrs. Purdy in a low voice. A maid of striking beauty appeared. Si, señora, she asked, her dark eyes sparkling. Mrs. Purdy spoke rapidly in Spanish, then said to Nancy and her chums, Manuela will take care of your wants while you are here. She speaks a little English. What she doesn't understand, she can guess at. The girls were escorted to a large bedroom with old-fashioned furniture. The charmingly draped windows overlooked the patio on one side and a broad expanse of lawn on the other. At the far side of the latter were trees and a small sparkling river, which the girls were told emptied into the La Plata. This place has atmosphere, and I love it, declared Bess. Did you ever see such gorgeous flowers? Late in the afternoon, the girls went for a walk along the river. Returning, they found that the trunks, including Nestrelda's, had been delivered during their absence. I'll have Trildy's resent tomorrow, Nancy declared. That should be long enough to wait. I hope you won't get into trouble because of your kindness, said George. As soon as that trunk is on its way, my responsibilities will end, Nancy remarked in relief. Now I'll explain something of the situation to Mrs. Purdy and ask her to get a cartero for me. A what? Asked George, her eyes wide. To you, an expressman, laughed Nancy. To anyone living in B.A., a cartero. The following morning, the girls again went for a walk, this time along the highway. When they returned, they noticed a taxi standing in front of the villa. "Mrs. Purdy appears to have other visitors from the city," observed Nancy. As the chums drew closer, a man hurried from the entrance. Jumping into the cab, he drove away. "Nancy!" exclaimed George. "That man looked for all the world like your red-haired friend." "He did at that!" cried Nancy, catching her chum by the hand. "Come on! At last we'll learn who he is." End of chapter 16.